So welcome everybody to our webinar today. We are going to be talking again about teaching verbs at the beginning level and go a little bit more in depth with the present simple tense and showing you how we can teach these verbs using Bible verses. So the present simple tense, or sometimes we call it the reverse, the simple present tense, is the verb tense that we use in English for facts and habits, things that are routines that we do all the time, and things that are always true, like facts. It's one of the most common verbs in English, and it's a little bit tricky for many students, especially because there's something, it's called the third person singular S. So that means that if the subject of the sentence is he or she or it, if it's a singular subject that refers to one person or one thing, we put an S at the end of the verb in the present simple. So for example, when we talk about a habit, we can say we pray every day. But if the subject is he, you'd say he prays every day with that S at the end of it. So this is often confusing for our students because it doesn't really make sense. I think that's the main reason it's confusing. There's no reason for it. If you drop off that S and you say he pray every day, people will still understand you perfectly well. And so I think that's why it's sometimes harder for students to learn this, because when they do make the error, no one really notices too much. But if they want to speak English properly and to write it in a business setting or an academic setting, it's very important to put those S's at the end of the verbs and know when to do it. Another example of a fact in the present tense: the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. So notice again, the sun is one singular object, and so we have to put the S at the end of rises and sets. Okay, another confusing thing sometimes about simple present tense is that it's not actually used for the present. If we are talking about something that is happening right now, right this moment, we use the present progressive. It's also called the present continuous. So I can say, right now, I am talking. We don't say, right now, I talk. We have to use am talking with the ing to talk about things that are happening right now. And so students need to understand the differences between those two, between the present progressive and also the simple present tense, when to use those. So I'm going to share with you, this is Psalm 23 in the the NIRV, which is the version of the Bible for international readers. And it's a pretty simple Bible translation. You can find it at BibleGateway.com. But this is a good one to use with beginning students, along with also the easy read version of the Bible, the ERV. Those are two of them that we frequently use. So what I'm going to ask you guys to do, if you can access your annotation tools, we are going to take a look at this together And I'm going to ask you if you can mark up some of the present tense verbs that you find in this. And so this is an exercise actually that I got from Dr. Linda Reed, who works in Canada with the Southern Ontario ESL Ministries. And this is an exercise that she does with her students. Now, if you don't know how to annotate on Zoom, I'll make that your homework for next time to learn how to do that, because it's a little bit different on each device. But generally, if you look at the view, if you click on view on your screen and look for annotation tools, it will give you a choice of some different tools you can use. So you might be able to see right now, I've got a little highlight marker. Tanya, do you know how to use your annotation tools on Zoom? Okay, so what I'm going to do, and also Prakash and Paris and Pastor Akufo, if you guys have it, what I want you to do is to highlight any of the verbs you see that are in the present tense. So I see, like right here, Tanya did is. What other verbs do you see in the 23rd Psalm? Good, Tanya's got that one too. Gives, lets, okay, Prakash has got some too. Good. And Paris has some. Leads, guides. Excellent. Very nice. You guys are finding these. Terrific. Comfort. Prepare. Good. And so you'll see as we're going through these, thanks you guys, you're doing a great job with these, that we have many present tense verbs in this psalm. In fact, most of the verbs in this psalm are present tense. There's a couple of them that are in future tense. So I noticed like this one here, will live. This one is future tense because it has the word will in it. And so when we see will or going to in front of a verb, that gives us the clue that it's the future tense. All right, nice. And so, yeah, and so there's another one. So will follow, that's the future tense.
I got carried away with the verbs. I love verbs.
I do too. And verbs are great. They're a great way to help us understand Bible verses too. So as we go through this verse and we consider what do we learn about this shepherd? What do we learn about the characteristics of this shepherd, and what does this shepherd do? We can go through these verbs. So he gives me everything I need. He leads me, he guides me. He prepares a feast for me. He protects me. So we're going to take a look. So now that we've identified some of the verbs here, we notice some of the verbs end with an S and some of them do not end with an S. And so what do we see about the verbs that end with an S? Who is doing those verbs that end with an S? Who is the subject of the verbs that end with the S?
The Lord.
The Lord, yes. So the Lord God, he is one. So he is a singular subject. So he gives me everything I need. He lets me lie down. He leads me. He gives. He guides. And so we notice whenever the subject is the Lord, right? The Lord is also ends with S, or it's he, we're going to have those S's at the end of the verbs. But when we're talking, when I talk about myself, or here, this is King David talking about himself in the first person, but when the subject is I, we see it's I need. I need. There's no S at the end. I walk. There's no S at the end. Now, we'll also notice that David switches from talking about the Lord to talking directly to the Lord. And so in verse 4, instead of using he is with me, David says, you are with me. So he's talking directly to God. And notice when the subject is you, we don't say you is, we say you are. So that's the second person subject. So if it's I or you, the verb is not going to have an S in the present tense. Here, the subject is plural, your rod and staff. So that's two things, plural. Your rod and staff, your shepherd's rod and staff comfort me. And so the word comfort is in the present tense, but there's no S because it has two subjects, the rod and the staff. If it just had the rod, it would be your shepherd's rod comforts me. But since there's two things, your rod and staff comfort me, there's no S at the end. And so this gives you a little bit of an example of how we can show our students using the Bible verses how these verbs are used, and it can also bring us into a greater conversation. We can then bring it into asking our students, so how has the Lord acted as your shepherd? Do you feel the Lord leading you? When has he led you? When has he given you strength? When has he provided everything you need? And they can start talking about personal examples in their life. And that's what we want to do, is to get people to apply the scripture in their own lives, not just as an academic activity, but that we can have deeper conversations. And so again, I said I borrowed this exercise from Dr. Linda Reed, and she talks about an hourglass formation. So if you think of the shape of an hourglass, I'm going to try to draw on here. So an hourglass, it's wide at the top, so we can start out our conversation about a Bible verse in a very big way. Starting out, the Lord is my shepherd, and saying, what does that mean? What does it mean? The Lord is my shepherd. What does a shepherd do for his sheep? How is the Lord a shepherd? And then we can go into, we narrow it down. So like an hourglass gets narrowed down towards the middle. We narrow it down and we look at these specific verbs, and we can talk about the grammar of the verbs. He leads, he gives, he guides. And then we expand it out again. That's the the end of the hourglass. And that's when we start asking students the bigger questions of how they apply it to their lives. How, you know, how have you seen God's love and mercy following you all the days of your life? Do you trust that it will follow you all the days of your life? Do you know that you will live in the house of the Lord forever? How does that make you feel? And talking about those larger issues. So we can start out with the overall view, narrow it down to grammar, and then bring it back out again to that personal application. So, any questions about this particular point? All right, then I am going to clear our annotations and go on to our next slide. Let's see. Okay, so we often, when we're teaching grammar, we will use charts like this. And in the Light of the World materials, we have a lot of grammar charts. And that's just a way for students to sort of visually dissect the information and see patterns in it. So one of the first verbs we learn in the simple present tense is the verb to be, which has 3 different forms in the present tense: am, is, are. And we notice that the am form is only used with the pronoun I am. Are can be used with you singular, you plural, we or they. So the way I usually explain it to my students is the pronoun you can mean one person or it can be many people. But we always use the plural form of the verb with the word you. So you are a person, or we can say you are people. So it can be referring to one or to many. And he, she, or it, if it's one person or one thing, we're going to use is. And so again, that's that third person S. We need to have an S at the end of the verb when it is being used in the singular form in the third person simple present. Now, here is an example using positives and negatives in the simple present tense. So we here are using the verb like. So if it's I, we, you, or they, I like cheese. We, you, they like cheese. Or for the negative, we just put don't in front of it. I don't like cheese. Now, the students will sometimes make the mistake of just saying not. I not like cheese. But it's important we use this auxiliary verb do when we're forming questions or negatives in the simple present tense. So we have to say do not or don't for the negative. If it's he, she, or it, the positive is likes cheese with an S, and the negative is doesn't like cheese. So here the S kind of goes in the first verb, does, so that's short for does not. We still have an S in the negative, but it's not on likes, it's on the first verb. So that's important for them to know that if there's more than one verb in the sentence, the S will typically go on the first verb, not the second one. And when we ask questions, we have to put do in front of it. So instead of just saying you like cheese, the proper way to form the question would be, do you like cheese? Do I like cheese? Do we like cheese? Do they like cheese? But if you're asking about a singular person or object or animal, we say does. Does he like cheese? Does it like cheese? Does the mouse like cheese? The short answers will be yes, I do. Yes, he does. No, I don't. Or no, he doesn't. We can also make those longer. We could put like cheese. So yes, I do would be a fine short answer, but you could also expand it and say, yes, I do like cheese. Yes, he does, or yes, he does like cheese. Okay. And a great way to review these simple present verbs is to talk about routines, because this is a place where we often use the simple present to talk about things that we do every day or often or a couple of days a week. So we can ask our students, this is one of the slides from our A1 curriculum. We can ask them to make sentences about this man. And so we can say, for example, I can ask, for number one, what is the first thing that the man does in the morning? Who can tell me? Pastor Akufu? One more time?
Hello?
Yes, one more time, Pastor. Can you repeat that? What does the man do?
He wakes up from bed.
Yes, he wakes up. Very good. He wakes up. So that's the first thing he does. And then I can say, well, what about you, Tanya? What is the first thing you do in the morning? And you're muted, Tanya.
I wake up.
I wake up.
I wake up.
I wake up.
Good,
Yes, wake
good. Up. So if it's he, we're going to say he wakes up with an S. But if it is I, it's going to be I wake up without an S. Okay, very good. And so we can go through and talk about everything, all 12 things that this man does during the day. And I can ask, when do you work? When do you watch TV? When does he watch TV? And they can answer those questions using the simple present tense and getting used to switching back and forth between the S and the non-S format. All right. And then let's go ahead and, oops.
May I also,
you have a question?
Yeah, what lesson is that in the LOTW?
That is a great question. I am not sure, but we can, if we go to the light of the world, I can, I don't know right now, but if we go to the table of contents for light of the world, we could look it up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know it's it's the lesson that's on daily routines.
Okay, good.
But I'm not sure of the number. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So then, there are a few of the verbs that are irregular. So most of the verbs, we just put an S at the end of them. However, the verb have, do, and go have a slightly different form. So instead of saying haves with an S at the end, we change it to has. Instead of do's, DOS, we say does. So the pronunciation changes and it's got an ES. And instead of go, it's goes. So those are the three common ones that we study separately because we use those three words, have, do, and go all the time. So it's really good to drill these three especially and make sure they know it's has and does. Another one that changes pronunciation is say and says. So it's not says, it says, which is just slightly different, can be a little tricky. Now the spelling of the third person singular, the rule I give is that if the verb ends in a hissing sound, so sh, sh, s, x, z, those are the hissing sounds. If the verb ends in a hissing sound in the base form, we will add es in the simple present third person singular. So for example, the word watch, so it has that watch, sort of a hissing sound at the end. We change it to watches. So it gets an extra syllable and it's spelled with es. And the reason is because the word watch kind of sounds already like it has an S at the end of it. So to make it different in the third person, it's got to have that extra syllable with the es. The same thing, guess, guesses, finish, finishes, fix, fixes, buzz, buzzes. If the verb ends in a consonant and then the letter Y, and so remember your consonants are the letters of the alphabet except A, E, I, O, U. So A, E, I, O, U are the vowels, and then the consonants are all the rest of the letters. So if you have a consonant plus a Y, you're going to change that Y to IES. So study changes to studies, carry, carries, fly, flies, worry, worries. And so it's good to let them know that there are some spelling rules that they can follow. That'll give them a little more confidence in their spelling and their writing if they can remember those spelling rules for the adding the ES or the IES to the verbs. Any questions on those?
No.
All
It's
right.
good. It seems fantastic.
Good, good. I'm glad this is helpful for you. All right, so now I'm going to ask you guys to find the mistakes in these sentences. So we have 9 sentences here, and each one has an error that is very common, that ESL beginner learners often make these errors. And I want to see if you can find the errors. So what I'd like you to do again is if you can go to your annotation tools and find your annotation highlighter or pen, go ahead and see if you can, good, Prakash already did one. See if you can mark up those words that are incorrect, the mistakes in each sentence.
On the bus also, I think by the bus. Oh, okay, okay. I think we can use on the bus.
Yeah, in the United States, we use the word on for public transportation. So we get on the bus, on the airplane, on the train, but we use the word in for private transportation. So I get in a car, in a taxi, but I get on a boat if it's on the ferry. Okay, excellent, excellent. You guys are doing a great job finding these. Terrific. Okay, so number one, do he like baseball? What should it be instead of do he like baseball?
Does he like baseball?
Does,
Basketball.
oh, basketball. I'm sorry, it's basketball. Thank you. Does he like basketball? Good. And
That's
number,
the question. So, I mean, it's because it's a question with a third person singular,
yes, right. So if
just to give kind of the background.
uh-huh.
As a native language, I can just tell you those are wrong. But as explaining, I think a little bit, it's third person question. Singular.
Yes, exactly. It's third person question, so it has to use does in the question. Great. And then he don't likes pizza. What should that be instead?
I'll
He
say third.
Doesn't.
Good.
Yes, he doesn't like pizza. So since we have an S in the does for does not, we don't need an S at the end of like. So that's another common mistake. Once they start making S's, sometimes they'll make too many S's and put them on their questions and negatives too. All right, and so then number 3 is just a spelling error. She goes to school. So the goes has to have an ES in there. And that's true of most words. If they end with a consonant O, then we put an E after the O before the S. Number 4 is also a spelling error. The film finishes at 8. So we need an E in there before the S. My friends leave on holiday next week. Okay, so friends here is plural. And since we have 2 friends or more than 2 friends, then we do not put an S at the end of the verb. So if we have an S here, then we don't have an S here. And vice versa. If we didn't have an S on friends, then we could just use the S on the verb. Number 6 is spelling. She carries, should be with an IES. Carries her little sister. Number 7, instead of halves, is just going to be has, HAS. So that's one that we have to practice. It's irregular. It seems like it should be halves, but it's has. Here again, does we plays in the garden? It's going to be do we play in the garden? And our teacher not talks very much. It should be our teacher does not talk very much. So that if it's a negative or a question, we have to put do or does in the simple present tense. So these are common errors to watch out for that you'll see and hear your students making in their speech. And so a good way to correct these, instead of just telling them, no, for number one, instead of just saying it should be, does he like basketball? Get them to think about it. Say to them, okay, for number one, you wrote, do he like basketball? But what is the subject in this sentence? And they might say, oh, the subject is he. And then they start thinking, okay, because it's he, we have to change it to does, because it's that third person singular. And by the way, it's a little bit confusing language we use for third person. The reason we do that is the way we count people in English grammar is I am the first person. If I'm talking to you, you are the second person in the conversation. And if you and I are talking about another person who's not part of the conversation, let's say you and I are talking about John, who's not here right now, he is the third person. So I'm the first person, you're the second person, John is the third person. And that's the singular. So we have first, second, and third person. In the plural, I, plural, is we. And you, plural, is still you. And he, plural, would become they. So John and Mary, they. So that's how we get that language that's kind of confusing about first person, second person, third person. That's where it comes from. So I hope that this has been helpful for you guys. And and this presentation is available in your webinar invitation. There's a link to this presentation so you can see this and all of the rest of our presentations there.